Hey, welcome to BJJ Mental Models, episode 71. I'm Steve Kwan.
I'm Matt Kwan.
BJJ Mental Models is your guide to a conceptual and intelligent jiu-jitsu approach. And I don't know about you, Matt, but I have basically lost all semblance of time.
Yeah, what day is it?
For me, let me see. I have now been in quarantine for 33 days. So yeah, it's just everything kind of blends together. I totally forgot that Easter was this weekend. It totally snuck up on me because, again, no concept of time whatsoever. Work and life and everything are kind of all blending together.
Yeah, I got a chocolate hangover and spent some time at the folks' cabin there and just trying to relax and keep my mind busy at the same time. It's kind of interesting. And I wonder if, I think you can look at this quarantine in maybe two different ways. One way is you're just, constantly getting high playing video games, or you're actually trying to accomplish something and grow in other ways. So it's kind of it's an opportunity actually in ways, and in other ways it's kind of, I think, going to be a wasted opportunity for a lot of people.
Yeah, we just released the podcast on entrepreneurship, and one of the theses that I had from that podcast was to explain how you can find positive in bad situations. I mean, being quarantined sucks, but there's opportunity there as well. A lot of people are using this time to get in better shape or spend more time with their family or get new business ideas off the ground. So the best thing to do rather than sit there and get depressed is to find a way to turn this into a positive. There's always an opportunity that you can find in a crisis. So hopefully that episode was helpful to listeners out there. In terms of doing useless stuff, my big thing is I've been playing the new Final Fantasy VII Remake, which is highly recommended.
Yeah, it's really good.
Yeah, it's really, really good. I mean, I don't know exactly how many people out there. I guess we'd have to look at the demographics, but probably a lot of our listeners played that game growing up, and the new one is just as good, if not better, in my opinion. So,
what about the soundtrack?
Still, yeah, they remastered it, they updated it. It's great. Whole thing is great.
Great soundtrack.
Yep, it's absolutely ludicrous in the best way. But it's kind of interesting because in that game you are eco-terrorists. And I guess when I was playing the original game, I didn't really this didn't really sink in with me, but in this one it's the game opens and you basically blow up a power plant and kill thousands of people.
And you're the good guys.
And you're the good guys. It's actually really weird. But yeah, that aside. So today we wanted to talk about controlled breathing. Now, we get a lot of questions about this, and I've been humming and hawing about this for a while because it's hard to really put together a full 1-hour episode on how to breathe properly, but I think it's worth talking about. So we get a lot of feedback from white belts especially who say, hey, I know I'm supposed to control my breathing. Everyone tells me that I'm supposed to control my breathing. How do I actually do that? Which is a good question. And I think this is one of those things that we kind of fail to teach people. Even before you learn about how jiu-jitsu works, I think some of the first and most fundamental things that you should teach people are don't tense up, which we covered in the last episode, and learn to control your breathing. There's a lot of reasons why, and I think maybe a good way to structure this episode is to first talk about why it matters to control your breathing, and then actually maybe talk about some strategies as to how to actually do it. Sound good, Matt?
Yeah, I can remember my first jiu-jitsu class. The instructor actually yelled at me at one point because I was breathing and exerting way too much noise. And then he's like, hey, quiet down. And I look around and
that's hilarious.
And everyone is quiet when they're rolling. I'm like, oh, I'm being way too theatrical here. I shouldn't. And you'll see new people on their first day or, their first week. They don't really know the framework of an actual jiu-jitsu round or a match. So they're basically just in there fighting for their life. And I think that's a big factor is if you don't know actually you don't have a good framework of the positions and the ebb and the flows between two people in a jiu-jitsu match, then, you're going to be more panicking. You're going to be less knowledgeable of what's going on. And as a result, you'll probably not be thinking about your breathing too much, assuming you're a beginner, right? That's why when you see high-level practitioners, very rarely are they, huffing and puffing in an uncontrolled way. Not to say that they don't get, gassed out or whatever, but they're very careful how they exert their breathing. And yeah, I think that's one of the main things that beginners struggle with is how to keep calm during that time of extreme stress.
Yeah, when you are grappling for the first time, it's scary, right? I mean, you're basically in what feels like a fight. Now, once you've been grappling for a long time, you realize that jiu-jitsu is actually pretty far away from a real fight, but it feels like it the first time you're doing it, right? And you don't know what you're doing, so it's natural to get scared, and that means that it's natural that your breathing is going to be ragged and out of control. And it takes a while to learn to get comfortable with that. Whenever you go into any new scary experience, normally one of the first things that happens is you kind of seize up, you go into fight or flight mode. And that's one of the reasons why getting experience in challenging situations is so important, because it is that experience that teaches you not to panic, right, Matt? It's like how you and Rob were talking about how if you want to learn self-defense, one of the best things to do is to do competition, because that's the closest thing to a real fight that you're likely to experience, right? And you'll experience that anxiety and those jitters. Whereas if you're just training in the gym, yeah, there is a level of anxiety there, especially when you're starting, but after you've been doing it for a few months, I mean, going to the gym becomes a pretty comfortable and fun experience, and you're losing that anxiety. So it's a situation where you want to challenge yourself by going into these situations that scare you. And that's part of how you learn to adapt and accommodate to them. So really a big part of controlling your breathing is getting that experience. Now, in terms of why it matters, like why do you actually want to control your breathing? I mean, first and foremost, a big part of it is energy management, right? And again, just a disclaimer, I am far from a scientist here. I do not promise that everything we say is totally scientifically accurate and correct. And I've done very minimal research on this, but I can tell you from my experience and from others who grapple why this matters. And I do know that the science is out there that demonstrates the importance of controlled breathing and managing your breath. So something to bear in mind, that if you really want like full factual, detailed information, there's a lot of sources out there that you can find quite easily through Googling, but we'll talk about it to the best extent that we can. I mean, one of the most important things when it comes to controlling your breathing is controlling your fight or flight response. You know, there's the part of your brain, the amygdala, which triggers your fight or flight when you get scared, and that basically dictates how you're going to respond to a situation. You're either going to, freak out, or you're going to seize up, or you're going to try to run away. Controlling your breathing goes a long way towards preventing your brain from going into that fight or flight mode. So this is why when you're a kid, for example, they tell you if you're angry, take 10 deep breaths or something like that. There's actually science behind why that is going to work. It's because it forces your body to slow down and to regulate itself and to get your pulse back under control. And then you can regain control of your faculties. Whereas when you're panicking, your brain goes into fight or flight mode, and the like higher level functions of your brain aren't in control anymore. It's the same reason why when you're mad or you're in a fight with a partner or a coworker, they tell you to like go take a walk and then come back, or to talk about it later, and not to have like an argument while you're mad. It's because you're not using the important parts of your brain while you're doing that. You're going into survival mode. And so learning to control your breathing is a good way to regulate that. I mean, I would also guess that it's probably better for your endurance as well. I don't know exactly how true that is, but I would assume it is, that if you are, controlling your breathing, you can probably control your heart rate and probably control your energy expenditure. I would assume so. It also prevents you from telegraphing fear to your opponent, which you never want to do.
That's
like
true. Yeah.
Through breathing, you actually allows you to telegraph a lot to your opponent. If your opponent's breathing is really ragged, then you know that they are struggling. And similarly, if they're really gasping for breath, you know that whatever you're doing to them is working. So it's a way to telegraph to your opponent that you're losing, and you don't want to do that. And one other thing that is important to remember when it comes to controlling the breath is if you can control your breathing, it's going to render things like chokes harder to implement. So for example, if someone's got a chokehold on you and you panic and you start breathing like crazy, that's probably going to increase the blood flow, which is going to make it easier for your opponent to choke you. So it's really important when someone is choking you to learn to be relaxed and control your breath. And that will buy you maybe even a few seconds of time to fight your way out of it. So that's part of the reason why they tell you don't spaz out of a choke, because in addition to safety, when you're in a choke, you don't want to increase your blood flow. You want to slow down and be more relaxed to buy yourself some time.
Yeah, those are all great points, Steve. Like you said, controlled breathing essentially has an effect where it regulates your energy. and controlling your breathing will regulate the amount of oxygen that gets to your muscles. So things like burning your muscles out and lactic acid building up. Again, I'm not a scientist, but you basically will stay fresher if you can manage your breath. And even not even during a match, but before a match, when you're on deck and you're waiting to go on, that's some of the most anxious times a competitor can have. Usually, for me anyways, once I get on the mat, I feel much more comfortable than when I'm waiting in the bullpen or when I'm standing watching, the guys in front of me fighting and then I'm about to go on. So breathing is kind of your best friend because it really can bring you back down to earth, and bring your heart rate down and get you focused. And I find that in a match, usually the person who's dictating the tempo usually doesn't have the problem with the breathing. It's, I've been in matches where I dominate the entire match and I come away and completely fresh and it felt like I was in the moment the entire time, and it's because I was dominating the tempo and my breath was never really compromised. I was always able to see what was going on and make decisions as the problems were coming up. But if my I've been in matches when my opponent can gain the tempo on me, maybe they pass my guard momentarily and then it's like, oh shit, now it's defensive mode. All of a sudden your breathing increases, your heart rate increases, anxiety increases, and you all have to, you have to manage all of these problems all at once. So it's really important that no matter what happens, that you do maintain control of your breath, because getting to those positions where, you're either dominating the tempo or you're in like a neutral position in a rest situation, that's kind of the spots you want to be able to funnel your game towards so that you can now dictate, your game on the other person.
Yeah, it's interesting because when you watch low-level, inexperienced people grapple, you'll notice that usually they're getting by on cardio, right? Normally, they're getting by on athleticism, and they can really burn themselves out really quickly. Now, some people are just inherently more athletic or have better cardio, and that can give them a false positive where they think that they're doing things right because, oh yeah, my body lets me go for 30 minutes at this pace. I mean, I must be doing something right, but not really. If you look at more experienced people, they don't grapple that way. Like if you are watching two, purple, brown, black belts fight, a lot of the time they can go for quite a while because they're trying to minimize their energy expenditure, and breathing is a big part of that. So, I mean, if you see, two high-level people at your gym roll, I mean, normally they can probably go for quite a long time. And it's not even that they necessarily have this giant gas tank. A big part of it is just that they're managing their energy expenditure, and they're doing that by controlling their breathing and by trying not to tense up. So that's a very, very important strategy. Another thing, Matt, that you brought up, which is really important, is the ability to combat anxiety and jitters by using breathing. And this is something that, like mindfulness and meditation experts have been talking about for like thousands and thousands of years. Basically, if you focus on your breathing, then that allows you to, it gives you like an anchor for your mind to focus on. So you can focus on something in the present moment. When you're anxious, normally it's about something in the future that hasn't happened yet. People get very anxious, for example, if they're heading into a public speaking event or a job interview or a competition or something like that. And the reason why is because they're worried about the future. They're worried about what's going to happen to them in a day, an hour, a few minutes. And one of the best strategies for combating that is to focus on the present moment. So this is something that I always do when I have a big meeting or very important event coming up beforehand. Rather than spending days obsessing and worrying over it and kind of getting anxious, I focus on what's going on in the present moment. And one of the easiest ways to do that is to pay attention to your breathing. So again, that's a very good way to calm yourself down when you're stressed out, is to focus on what your breath is doing. And that will take you out of whatever is happening that is creating that stress for you.
Yeah, just, keeping your nerves calm by controlling your breathing and not getting overstressed will pay off big time for a competitor, because it'll usually help prevent those big adrenaline dumps. And it's one of the biggest things that happens to competitors in competitions is, and it can happen even before the fight. Like I've had situations where I'm about to step on the mat and I feel faint and I'm like, oh God, the adrenaline dump is happening. And it's really a mental battle to be able to manage this, before, during, and after, or in between matches. And just sometimes you're not in a good position by the time you get up, it's time to go on. So it's really important that you play that mental game within your mind and slow yourself down. And yeah, like adrenaline dumps will kill you as a competitor. And you mentioned, Steve, how, two high level guys rolling in the gym, or they don't even have to be high level. They could just be two guys rolling in the gym. A lot of the time, you could roll for like 20 minutes and be fine. I mean, you'll be tired, but it's not like you are dead, whereas in a competition, if you're in a 10-minute match, by the end of the match, just because of the environment and the stakes on the line and the fact that you don't know the other person you're fighting, a lot of the time, even not 10 minutes, you're going to be absolutely exhausted. And it's because all these other factors come into play when you're not on home ice advantage, as you might call it. Whereas when you're in the gym, it's a familiar setting. There's no stress, there's no eyes watching, there's nothing on the line. All these things sort of add up. And I think one of the best ways that you can keep yourself calm when you introduce all these different factors is focusing your breath. And, one of the things that Danaher always talks about is like, and I try and tell myself when I'm going into a match too, is that this is basically no different from rolling in the gym. This is what you would be doing every day. It's just a matter of turning off the lights, turning off the crowd, and just focusing on the task at hand. It's just another day doing jiu-jitsu.
Yeah, definitely. And I mean, that's a good point, which is that a lot of the time, if you're under a lot of stress, you can even get like faint-headed. And that's because you're kind of letting your emotions and your fear get the better of you. And going back to the breath is one of the best ways to control and manage that. The interesting thing is it doesn't really matter how good you are as a grappler. Like you could be a world-class jiu-jitsu practitioner, but there's two things that are always going to shut you down no matter what, no matter how good you are, no matter how athletic you are. One of them is lactic acid. Corona. Okay, three things. One of them is lactic acid, right? It doesn't matter how good you are. If you allow your muscles to burn out, you can't fight. That's just the way that it is, right? The other thing is the breath. If you can take away someone's ability to control their breathing, they're going to go into panic mode. That's why things like smothering attacks actually work really well.
Oh, wonderful.
Yeah.
Like from mount and things like that.
Yeah,
Smothering the face is amazing.
Yeah, because it doesn't matter how good your training is. It doesn't matter how much technique you have. If you cut off someone's ability to breathe, they're going to go into panic mode and they're going to make mistakes. So that's a strategy that totally works. And being able to control your breathing, even in very scary situations, is so key. I mean, I know we've talked about this earlier, but back in the day, you watch UFC fights and there used to be this whole game they would play where they would like cover the person's mouth or their nose with their hands. And the idea was to make their breathing ragged and to take away their ability to control their breath. And we do see this in jiu-jitsu a lot, especially from mount, where you try to smother the person and that forces them to make stupid mistakes and to expose their neck and to expose their arms, right? So definitely a strategy. And as a grappler, part of your game has to be not just managing your technique and your strategy, but also managing the resources of your body, which means like managing your energy, managing your oxygen, and breathing is such a key part of that.
Yeah, it's just, the thing that instantly popped into my mind when you're talking about making your opponent's breath ragged is Wagner Hocha and his Python technique. Like that should be the thumbnail. That should be the thumbnail.
Yeah, that's a good one.
For controlled breathing.
That looks super duper unpleasant.
He basically, you're in the back, and instead of trying to even do like a neck crank or get underneath the jaw for a rear naked choke, you essentially just cover your opponent's mouth and nose. I think he did a video on how he does it, and he actually, if I'm not mistaken, he covers the nose downward so that it kind of folds the nostrils closed. And it's first of all, it's embarrassing as hell. And second of all, it's super effective to the point where I think Eddie Bravo actually outlawed it in EBI because he said that it's the dirtiest part of your opponent's body over your face, which is funny because combat jiu-jitsu allows slaps to the face with the same part of the body.
Yeah, if you're overly obsessed about like people's hygiene, then I think that you've got bigger fish to fry if you're doing jujitsu. This strikes me as how when like the coronavirus outbreak kept happening, people were saying like, don't worry, our gym, we sanitize the mats all the time. And it's like,
It's not really what it's about.
I don't think you guys really understand exactly where the risk is coming from. And yeah, same thing there. I mean, regarding covering the mouth, like, I don't think that should be outlawed. That is a completely legitimate strategy.
Totally legit. I think that should be allowed for IBJJF. I mean, it's not like the person's going to suffocate.
No, they can always tap.
They can always tap, right? Like, and it's not like you're doing actual damage.
No, it's frankly a lot safer than probably even like applying a choke. So
yeah, it should be legal.
It should definitely be legal.
But it's dirty as hell, and it is gross, I will say, but it's super effective. So you can't deny, covering someone's nostrils as not being effective. So
I prefer to just use my giant like dad bod beer gut and just get mount and then just squish people with my flab. I mean, hey, if you're a fat dude, like this is one of the few times when like being big and like heavy and fat is going to be an advantage to you, is just taking mount and then just basically smothering people's faces.
Yeah, and what's awesome about that is like if you do that, your hands are actually free to base out and to, pummel and and isolate wrists and stuff. So yeah, absolutely. Using your torso, especially if you're, like you said, a big fat hairy guy with no rash guard.
Oh man.
That's the worst when someone without a rash guard does it. It's like, God, this is...
Oh, it's the absolute worst. I mean, at that point, it's borderline psychological warfare. It's really gross, but it's effective.
Yeah, it's legit though.
It is legit. So, I mean, I guess we've hopefully convinced everyone at this point why controlled breathing is important. And odds are most people probably had at least a peripheral understanding of why it matters, but it's hard, right? It's very, very hard to actually do this, particularly in a tense situation. So I guess the next question is, okay, you're convinced, this is important. How do you do it? How do you force your body to do something that is unnatural to you? And I guess it goes back to kind of the beginning, like we said at the top of the episode. A big part of it is just getting comfortable being uncomfortable. It's hard and your breathing gets ragged because you're scared, and you're scared because this is a new experience. And the more you expose yourself to that experience, the less scared you're going to be and the easier it's going to become. I mean, if you think back to like your first jiu-jitsu class, especially before you even got on the mat, but like when you were about to go to the class and then you got to the class and then you were getting changed and you were about to go on the mat, recall how scary that was, right? And then recall, like, even a month later, how scary it wasn't anymore. It's amazing how quickly you can get used to these things. So that's something to consider, that, repeated exposure to your fears is a good way to strengthen your resolve and to conquer those fears. And with breathing, it's very much the same thing. So really any kind of environment where you're scared to do something, whether it be a competition or jiu-jitsu or even like public speaking, repeated exposure is one of the best ways to conquer that fear and to learn how to control your breathing and to get used to it. So that's one way that I would suggest. But another thing that matters with controlled breathing is the best way to control your breathing is not just to do it when you're doing jiu-jitsu, but to do it all the time.
Mm-hmm. It's in every aspect of life.
Yeah, you want to build it as a habit for your entire life, not just for grappling. Because if your thought is, I'm not thinking about my breath at all, but then when I go to jiu-jitsu, I got to really think about my breath. Well, you're going to make mistakes and you're going to have a hard time maintaining your breath because it's not something you're used to thinking about. So that's why when you look at like meditation or yoga or mindfulness practitioners, they're always talking about the breath and how like at all times, you should develop awareness of the breath and always be aware of it, because in addition to helping you regulate your breath, that also gives you an anchor into what's going on right now in the present moment. And that makes it a lot harder for you to worry and obsess and get anxiety about things that are coming up or that have happened in the past. Like one of the interesting things about human beings is we spend so much time obsessing over what's going to come up in the future and so much time obsessing over what we did in the past and what we did wrong and the mistakes we made that we're not actually living in the present moment. And the present moment is really the only thing you've actually got, right? The past and the future are both kind of like, the future's hypothetical, the past has already happened. The only thing you really have is the present moment. So in order to really maximize enjoyment of life, you should do everything you can to live and experience the present moment to the fullest. And learning to kind of become aware of your senses, such as breathing, is a very, very good way to do that. So what's interesting is when you talk about like yoga and mindfulness and meditation, people think you're talking about all sorts of like spiritual healing crystal nonsense, right? But that's actually not really it. There is a tremendous amount of science that actually backs the importance of mindfulness training. And really the backbone of mindfulness training is learning to control your breathing. So the best way to do this, to control your breathing, is just to be trying to do it at all times. Like there's a lot of exercises, even apps you can use that teach you how to do this. And you want to get to the point where you're not just trying to control your breathing in key stressful moments of your life, but it's just something you're always trying to do. And you're trying to train yourself because you will make mistakes. Like you will forget to breathe properly. You will develop ragged breathing, and it's okay to make those mistakes. But the idea is you want to train your brain so that you constantly become aware of when you screw it up and you're not breathing properly. And then you pull yourself back onto the right course and you start breathing properly again.
Yeah. I saw Gary Tonin make a post about how do you stay calm in a fight, and how do you not have huge adrenaline dumps during a fight? And his answer was basically, well, if you come in unprepared, then you're going to be less confident. And if you're less confident, you're going to be worrying about what the other person does to you rather than what you're going to do. And, that's really good advice because it's I think one of the biggest mistakes competitors make, and I've made it too, is you kind of worry about what the other person's going to do rather than how you're going to win. And if you think about how the other person's going to, what they're going to do to you, then you're basically playing from a defensive mindset. So it's really important to, like you said, all the things where you're managing your breath and consciously really thinking about your breath at all times, whether you're in the gym or the match, but also come in fully prepared so that you have the confidence. You know that if you're going to get into a bad position, you have the cardio to dig yourself out, and you have the ability to fight back and be in the moment. I think like what you said, Steve, about being in the moment is one of the best ways that a competitor can make decisions in a match and not worry about what their opponent's going to do.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, absolutely.
And just like in life, if you have a stressful job, I remember, again, I'll just reference my old career when I was cooking and bills are just piling in and you're completely whited out with bills. It's like, there's so many times where just taking a deep breath helped me out, and then you can get back to work, as opposed to just, constantly stressing and not letting your heart rate recover. You're just running around like an idiot. But if you just take a second to just calm yourself with a breath, you'd be amazed sort of how you can focus in on the task at hand. And fighting's no different. So just like, when they're asking, oh, what can you do to improve your breath? I think like consciously thinking about it when you're in these times is really important. Kind of like, if someone has really poor posture and you have to get improve your posture. Well, one of the things you have to do is you have to consciously think about it and sort of create a good habit of keeping your shoulder blades pinched and your shoulders back. And that's the only way that you can really make it a habit. And then eventually that's just going to become the status quo with your posture, right? So if you're, if you're not thinking about your breath, if you're not trying to train yourself, in doing a really consistent job of that, then it's just, it's not going to happen as easily. So like I said, just like improving your posture, you have to be thinking about it at all times.
Yeah, it's funny because, we think that like the mind leads the body. And, we kind of think of like the body as the car and your mind is the driver. But it's not actually that simple. Like the mind and the body are actually really, really intertwined. And what's going on in your body can affect your brain. So if you're breathing raggedly or you're moving or acting really erratically, that can trickle right up to your brain, right? So, a good example of how the body can affect the brain is how if you smile, like it's actually proven that just the act of smiling more, even if you don't mean it, actually makes you happier, which is weird, but it does, right?
It's like Marcelo keeping a straight face during his matches.
Yeah, so the controlling the breath is a very similar practice of how if you can manage your breath, it manages your anxiety. And it's not just managing the breath as well. There are other things you can do to manage your anxiety. So for example, a lot of people, when they're really nervous, they'll move faster, or they'll start to like stutter, or they'll talk really, really fast because they're really nervous. They talk like this. So learning how to actually slow yourself down when you're talking is a good way to actually control your anxiety when you're doing public speaking. You're kind of forcing your body to slow down and to bring your pulse and your heart rate back down. It's a very, very similar approach to the way that you manage controlling your breathing.
That's funny that you mentioned that, because when I was recording my instructional with Rob and Stefan, that's the advice they kept giving me, was like, they said, okay, you're saying too much, like you're pausing and saying too much, kind of like a hockey player being interviewed, or any athlete getting interviewed is always
Yeah.
And so they said it's better to slow down and speak in a slow manner rather than saying all the time. And there's effects on the viewer where they actually can take in the information a little bit easier this way, and you don't sound like an idiot, right?
Yeah.
So slowing down your speech is really good. And I think we should also mention, just like sometimes people don't, it's not that they're breathing too hard, but they forget to breathe.
Yes.
And this can happen.
They hold their breath.
Hold your breath.
Yeah.
And this, of course, will lead to fatigue a lot quicker. But even in anything, imagine a common habit for people who are new to weightlifting is they hold their breath. And as a result, they get tired after a few reps, right? Whereas if you manage your breath and you create a rhythm with your breath and your exertion, then it becomes more like a rhythm. And then, you can get way more reps, you get way more out of your body, and you're just primed for more exertion. So it's really for all physical exertions, but like you mentioned, public speech and things like that, it's everywhere.
Yeah.
Anywhere you need to manage your nerves.
Yeah, basically you're regulating the pace of your own body. I mean, as a very, very wise and successful person once said, like, slow it down. And if you think you're already going slow it down even further. Now, of course, the wise man who said that was Triple H, one of the greatest WWE wrestlers of all time.
He also said, suck it.
A lot of gems coming from Triple H. But that really does actually matter, like, especially when you're public speaking. Like, we don't realize how fast we're talking a lot of the time. It's very easy when you're nervous because your brain is going at like 100 miles an hour. You try to bring your mouth up to that level and you don't realize that you're basically just like rambling and stuttering, but it's very clear to the other person that you're scared. And learning to slow down, like in your head, it feels like, man, I'm talking way too slow right now. I'm talking so slow. Everyone's going to notice. They won't. Like, no matter how fast or how slow you think you're talking, you can always slow it down even further. And this applies to breathing as well, right? Like, you might think that your breath is totally fine, but try slowing it down and try being more controlled. Because one thing to bear in mind is that your opponent, much like how if someone is nervous when they're speaking, and you can tell, if someone is nervous from their breathing, you can tell that as well if you're grappling with them.
Yeah,
and
you're close enough to hear it and feel it.
Yeah, and that's like the scent of blood. If you're sparring with someone, if you can tell that they're scared from their breathing, that's going to give you the confidence to know that you got to go for the kill now, and you do not want to be giving that signal to your opponent. Now, interestingly, another strategy for learning to control your breathing is, like we just said, your opponent is probably going to detect if you're freaking out. When you're training, tell your opponent, like, if you notice that I'm out of control with my breathing, tell me, give me a signal, because that's a good way to train yourself into the right behavior.
Ask for the immediate feedback.
Yeah, it's similar to how if you're tensing up too much, like if you're a white belt or a blue belt and you're worried that you're tensing up too much, the best thing to do is, if you're going against a really high level opponent, tell them, like, if I'm tensing up too much or I'm breathing too fast, tell me right away so I can correct it. And after that happens enough times, you're going to eventually learn how to manage that on yourself and to develop the awareness of that situation so you don't need someone else to tell you. So there's another strategy you can use to control your breathing.
Triple H married China at one point.
Triple H did. Were they actually married or just dating? I'm unclear.
They had sex.
Oh, God. Yeah, the evolution of China is fascinating. Man, there's going to be a lot of people that we've just totally lost in this conversation.
I don't know. If I was listening, I'd laugh.
I think I would too.
She died, eh?
Yeah, she did. I'm not sure. I think of a drug overdose or something. But man, what a life. Yeah. So Triple H is now married to Stephanie McMahon. I mean, talk about marrying up. You know, Triple H was like this weird giant-nosed weirdo, and then he like married the boss's daughter, and now he's running the company.
And now she's so juiced. Remember? I remember when she first started, and she was like this small, cute little girl.
And now she's like as jacked as her husband.
She's huge now.
Yeah, if you actually see her like compete in there with the other women, even against the full-time professional female wrestler roster members, Stephanie McMahon is way bigger than them. Like, she's huge.
Jesus.
Yeah.
Anyways,
so, I don't know. Maybe we should do an episode. We've done
on China.
I was going to say on steroids and getting juiced.
Actually, yeah, that's not a bad idea.
It would be interesting to have an objective conversation about that. I mean, my wife is a molecular biologist, so I was thinking of getting her to research it and come on and explain to everyone. If you're interested in like learning how to get jacked, I'm joking.
I am interested. Oh,
I don't encourage the use of going out there and getting totally roided up to the gills, but I am interested in like how the science of it actually works. So,
dude, I used to be so against steroids, and now that this is my full-time career and I'm like 32 and life's just flying by, I'm thinking like, damn, I'm starting to understand why people do this shit.
Yeah, it's one of those things where like, yes, it's cheating. Yes, in a perfect world, no one would do steroids. And yes, we probably don't want to encourage it because you don't want to wind up like escalating to the point where, again, like the WWE did, where you got people dropping dead at 30 because of too much drugs. But on the other hand, I think that it might be valuable to actually just have like an objective conversation about like, how do these things actually work? It's really, really an interesting area of science. And it kind of goes to show that like, yes, there's a lot of dogma around these things and probably rightfully so, because you don't want to go overboard on any kind of drug. But these things are tools that with the right oversight, they might be useful in some ways. I mean, the thing about steroids to bear in mind is like doctors will prescribe you steroids as a recovery mechanism in some situations because it works, right? Now, granted, there's obviously massive side effects to steroids.
Yeah,
but
if I think a lot of people do steroids, but they don't realize what it's actually doing to their endocrine system.
Yeah, or to their heart, right?
Like if you get a doctor who's really experienced in understanding hormones and things like that, then I think it's pretty safe. But if you just go to like the gym and your weightlifting buddy's there and he's like, you're going to get jacked if you do this. It's like, well, there's tons of things that are going on in your body and you might not even know what's going on, right?
Yeah.
You might not know what you're doing to your body. Like you could do certain types of steroids and then, in the end, it just ends up killing your entire testosterone. Or you could do ways where you can sort of balance it out and do it, quote, safely, right? And then there's things like HGH. Like I've heard human growth hormone. If you take that, it'll make everything in your body grow. So if you have like cancer cells, it'll make them grow too, which is not good.
Really?
Right? That's what I've heard. I'm not a scientist. This is literally what I know people who have told me this stuff. But I think that microdosing safe levels and coming from someone who's like really knows what they're talking about and has experience with hormones and the endocrine system, then it could be beneficial, I think.
I would not want
not detrimental to your health.
Yeah, I would not want to self-medicate with this kind of stuff because there's so much evidence of what goes totally haywire when people do that. But I do think that this is an area much like with like LSD and hallucinogenics where there should be a lot more objective research on this stuff. Now, the reality is, like, if it's illegal in a competition, it's illegal in competition. And I stand behind that, like, cheating is bad.
Yeah.
So I don't think you should use it in competition. It's cheating. I think any victory under the use of like a drug like that is obviously immediately tainted and invalid. But as a form of medicine, I think that we need to have an objective series of conversations about what it can do. Now this, granted, we're totally way off track here, but I think that
I was going to say, what if everyone else is cheating?
Yeah. But I think that actually this might be a good topic for a future episode. So if you want to learn the science of like getting totally jacked out of your minds, let us know, and maybe we can do that.
Also, I think people who do PEDs for jiu-jitsu they have different goals than people who are doing PEDs for weightlifting.
Yeah, like there's a difference between like I'm in like constant pain and my body's degenerating and I'm getting old and a doctor is going to help me control the doses versus I'm Andre Gaval. Like that's a total.
Whoa! Okay. Throwing shade at him.
Come on, like take a look at the before and after pictures of that guy. I'm not saying that it can't be done natural, but I would be very, very surprised.
It's so fucking prevalent in jiu-jitsu. Mm-hmm. It's like, like Leandro Lo used to be, I think, a lightweight. and now is just huge. Like, you know, you look at some of these guys like Gordon Ryan's, the growth that this guy's gone through. These guys aren't even really trying to hide it, right? And that's it's kind of the culture of our sport, unfortunately. And
that's where I think it gets dangerous, because if it becomes like an arms race like that, where now people are doing it out in the open and it becomes almost an expectation, that's when you start seeing things like what happened in pro wrestling, where it becomes kind of an arms race and everyone needs to be more jacked. And then eventually it gets to the part where like parts of your heart are enlarging and your testosterone is going crazy and people are like dropping dead at the age of 30. And that's where we want to avoid it. Anyway, possible teaser for a future episode. We could talk about that kind of stuff. Anything else that we wanted to talk about on the topic of breathing though, Matt? I mean, I think that's probably a pretty good comprehensive discussion. So,
but yeah, for beginners, if you're looking to, you know, calm down, that's probably a great place to start. And it's a skill, like we said multiple times in this episode, it just follows you throughout life. Anytime you're in a stressful situation, taking a deep breath is a huge, you know, it's a really important tool to understand and to use.
Yeah, that's one of the reasons why I think that managing the breath is so important, because controlling your breathing is going to benefit you across the board in shocking ways. If you learn to become aware of your breath, you're going to learn to become aware of when you're scared and aware of when you're panicking. And if you can learn to become aware of that and to calm yourself down before you do something stupid, you'll probably be shocked by how many conflicts you can avoid that were totally unnecessary, by how many stupid mistakes you can avoid, by how much the quality of your life improves. So really learning to control your breathing is kind of like a hack to improve your life across the board, but it will definitely also help in terms of controlling your breath in terms of jiu-jitsu. Very helpful there as well. So
it'll also help you when you're taking giant bong tokes.
I wouldn't know anything about this, so I'll take your word for it. So I guess just to recap again, some suggestions if you're having trouble learning to control your breathing. I mean, one thing to do, of course, is like mindfulness training. That's always very helpful, or any sort of breathing activity. Really what you're trying to do is you're trying to make controlling your breath a habit so that it's not something that you just do on the mats. It's also something that you do just all the time, 24/7. You're learning to control your breathing, because if you make it a habit, it's a lot easier to call on that habit when you need it versus doing something that you wouldn't normally do and you're not that comfortable or familiar with. In grappling, you can also obviously just tell your opponent when you're training to point out when your breath is out of control, and then use that as a trigger to kind of bring it back under control. And eventually you'll learn to do that on your own. That's a very, very helpful strategy as well. And Matt, like Matt mentioned earlier, if you ever notice a situation where you're kind of like out of the moment and you're getting anxious about something coming up, or you're getting anxious about something that you did in the past and you're obsessing over it, going to the breath and looking at your breathing and learning to control it and focusing on the breath is a very good way to pull your mind back into the present moment, which helps a lot with controlling anxiety.
Mm-hmm.
Cool. So just to recap the mental models that we talked about in this episode, of course, first and foremost, we talked about controlled breathing. We also talked about staying loose. This is very closely related to controlling the breath. And this is something we talked about in the last episode, where learning not to overtense your muscles and to stay relaxed is actually kind of goes hand in hand with learning to control the breath. We talked about growth from discomfort. So a big part of maintaining your relaxation is exposing yourselves to scary situations and getting comfortable with them so that you're not so scared in the future. We talked about mindfulness. Controlling your breathing is a very powerful way to bring your attention back into the present moment, which is great if you're anxious about something that's coming up in the future or something that you did in the past. And we talked about self-competition. So Matt mentioned that, it's very easy to obsess in competition about what your opponent's doing, but really what you need to do is focus on what you're doing. And controlling the breathing is a good way to kind of pull your brain back into the present moment so you're not so obsessed about what your opponent may or may not do. That's not going to be a productive thing, and it just allows you to get ahead of yourself and to trip over yourself. So it's always best when you detect yourself obsessing over something like that to do some breathing, pull yourself back into the present moment.
Yep. And also, of course, we didn't really touch on it much, but there are a lot of tools that you can use, like assault bike, different cardio machines. I always recommend the assault bike because for me, nothing exhausts me as much as that piece of machinery. But doing things like, never sitting out rounds, or even sometimes when I'm preparing for a tournament, I'll try and even skip the breaks. So if we're doing like 5s or 6s or whatever, I'll try and have a hard round and then immediately try and pick a new partner and just go right away when I'm tired. And I think sort of hunting that exhaustion, it gives you confidence, and it also, of course, increases your cardio. And getting off the assault bike exhausted and trying to grapple someone is not a comfortable feeling, but it can build you in those ways. So, there's also the physical aspect of improving your breath and improving your cardiovascular
Definitely
abilities.
Cool. You want to do some questions?
Yep. What do we got?
I got 3 questions. They're all very related. You're going to like them. First question. I just listened to episode 66 and would like to learn more about the Virtual Academy.
April Fools.
Yeah.
It was a joke.
Yeah. Second question.
We tried, though.
Yeah, we
tried to make it. And given the current landscape of what's going on, it's like perfect timing, because every gym owner right now is doing online classes. And I really can't knock the hustle. I appreciate these guys are trying to, keep revenue coming in and trying to provide for their students. But God, some of these online classes, man.
Yeah. I mean, hey, I think it's better than nothing, especially for kids programs, but it is also, there's kind of a degree of depression when you're doing these online classes, and it's just man, this is better than nothing. At least I'm getting off the couch, but this is just not the same.
Yeah. I'm doing online streams for kids 3 times a week, and we're basically just, the main focus is really improving the solo movements. And, if you can master those solo movements, those are things that I can't really focus a ton on in class, because I want them to get more sparring time. So when they come back, hopefully they'll have mastered these solo movements, and I can spend a lot more time talking about theoretical stuff like morals and, things of like life lessons, things of those natures, and fear. What is fear? Stuff like that. It's really good for kids to hear that. So
I think that one of the best ways to give value through jiu-jitsu is actually to use jiu-jitsu as a vehicle to teach people how to live better. This is kind of the whole point of the show in a lot of ways. It's technically about jiu-jitsu, but it's also really not. It's about something bigger. And so if you are a gym instructor, I know everyone is trying to pivot to doing these Zoom calls where people are doing solo drills. And that's great and all, but I think you should also consider maybe having more conceptual discussions about how jiu-jitsu can improve your life, and drawing parallels between that kind of stuff. I think that there's actually that's a very untapped market in these difficult times. So something to think about.
I'm using this opportunity to really focus on those things. Whereas in class, if I had a bunch of kids in the room, I'd want to spend the majority of the time in live sparring or live target sparring or drilling or whatever with a partner. Now I can focus on things where, maybe I wouldn't spend so much time talking about the life lesson aspect of what jiu-jitsu can do and how it can help your life. So I'm actually noticing good improvements in that way. And a lot of the parents have told me that they really like it.
Yeah. I actually, when we did that virtual academy thing, it was obviously an April Fool's Day joke. But if we're going to be honest, since then, we started running BJJ Mental Models virtual online streams every Sunday. So, and actually, they've been quite popular so far. We're going to keep doing those, I think, as long as we can. And especially during this COVID-19 outbreak, our plan is that every Sunday we want to do one of these online streams, at least until the outbreak is over, just so that people have something to do and can keep their head in it. If you guys all want to join, that would be awesome. We're doing it on Facebook right now, so you can go to our Facebook feed. It's every Sunday at 7 p.m. Pacific time. And if you miss it, Facebook records them, so you can always watch them later. But it's best to actually do them live, because they're very interactive. We get a lot of questions, and we try to answer the questions as we go. So if you've ever wanted to pick our brain about something and actually see visually how to answer that question, then that's probably the best opportunity. So check us out on Facebook, Sunday, 7 p.m. Pacific time. More questions here related to this, though. Why do you guys always do those sarcastic fake episodes? They confuse me, and I don't realize you guys are kidding until I'm halfway in.
You mean the April Fool's episodes?
Yes, people just don't get it, I guess. By the way, for those of you who say that, like, hey, you should go back to those old episodes and mark them as April Fools so that people know they're April Fools, we're probably never going to do that because
it's funnier this way.
It brings me great enjoyment if 8 months after we put out one of those episodes, I get some random email from someone's asking about it and asking why we'd say something so crazy. It's really that, like, it's the main benefit to this podcast is intentionally misleading people for our own amusement. And last question. 11 minutes and 24 seconds. That's how far I got into the explanation of your new online academy before I remembered that it was April Fool's Day. I was literally sitting here thinking, these poor fellas are selling out. They're really abandoning all principles and trying to cash in on this pandemic by telling people that they can just distance management through a YouTube video. Well played, fellas.
Awesome.
Yep. Cool. Well, I think that kind of wraps it up for today. Again, if you have any questions or comments, especially on the topic of breathing, or any advice that you'd like us to share about how you learned how to control your breathing, please do let us know. I'd be happy to route it out to the fans out there. And again, we're going to try our best to keep this thing going during the pandemic. Episodes is coming out every Monday. And of course, we also have the premium stuff on Patreon. If you want to support us during this time, I mean, I know a lot of you guys are, of course, impacted as well. We are too. And it really helps us keep the lights on if you can support us. Best way to do that is by contributing to our Patreon, which you can find at patreon.com/BJJ Mental Models. When you go there, you get access to episodes early. And if you are in the premium tiers, you get access to things like premium content that we're putting together on topics such as game planning. Probably going to be a lot of emphasis on things like strategy and maybe deep dives into particular situations and positions, submissions, the kind of stuff that we don't talk about here on the podcast. So far, the feedback on that premium stuff has been really positive. So please, if you can spare anything, I mean, obviously put your own needs first, but if you can spare anything, patreon.com/BJJ Mental Models. You can also support us by going to our online store, bjjmentalmodels.com/store, where you can pick up gi patches and t-shirts. And if you want more content or if you want to reach out to us, bjjmentalmodels.com is the mothership. That's the main website. We've got a database of all of these online concepts there that you can check out. You can also contact us from the site. If you go to bjjmentalmodels.com/join, you can sign up for our mailing list where we send extended content to our newsletter group. And of course, if you want to see what we're up to or get in touch with us in ways other than the website, you can check us out on Facebook and on Instagram.
Yeah. Thanks, guys, for all your support. It really helps us during this trying time. And like Steve said, I know, it's not the best time for everyone else, but every dollar helps, and we really appreciate all the support. So thank you, guys.
Yeah, it really does make a big difference. I mean, even if it's just $1, $2, $5, $10, whatever, like it adds up and makes a big difference. And it's also super motivating and flattering to us, I have to say, that so many people would be interested in supporting us and get enough value out of the show that they'd be willing to buck up for us. I really do appreciate that. But anyway, I hope this was a helpful topic covering one of the more frequently listener requested things. It only took us until episode 71 to get here, but we did. So yeah, again, if there's anything else you want to know about breathing or if you've got any pointers, please do reach out. And other than that, hope you guys, enjoy the rest of quarantine. Play some Final Fantasy VII. Highly recommended.
Yeah.
Anything else, Matt? Or should we wrap up?
No, I think that's everything. Thanks a lot for the listen, guys.
Thanks, guys. Take care.